think that the U.S. government will see China as very important here. You know, the Chinese have the ability to provide some degree of comfort and support for the Russians as they're engaged in these activities. As your reporters were just talking about, the degree to which Russia may be relying on the reserves that are being held in China, for instance, to help stabilize the currency and so forth, and the fact that China is very likely to be a recipient of Russian energy exports, especially if they're potentially subject to sanctions. So I think the interest here that National Security Advisor Sullivan is describing is to not have the sanctions get undermined by what China may choose to do, especially because it's a very sensitive moment in which the Russians may finally be feeling some pressure from the international community.
Yeah, but I mean, as I say, we're now entering the realms of coercive diplomacy. I mean, with the Europeans, there's a certain degree of cultural affinity and agreement politically with what's going on here. But when we get into this particular context, this is much more strong arming of the political situation. And do you think China is going to respond well to a strong arm approach from the United States on this?
Well, that's the thing about coercive diplomacy, is that ultimately it's not actually about cultural affinities, it's actually about national interests. And my experience in working on sanctions issues is that the Chinese are always going to consider their national interests, and they still have a substantial interest in being able to do business in Europe, do business in the United States. And the degree to which China is seen as undermining the sanctions campaign that the United States and Europe are pursuing may potentially adversely affect that. I think the Chinese are going to hold that pretty seriously. And so, how will they react? I agree that a strong arm approach is unlikely to, work wonders in Beijing. But at the same time, I think that they will even set that aside, any frustration, irritation they have with that aside, in order to ensure that their own interests are taken into account. And if that means, having to quietly, not necessarily cooperate, but certainly not flagrantly violate U.S. and European sanctions on Russia, I think they'd be prepared to do it. Again, so long as they see their net national interests at stake.